daunting. I don't sit well anymore.
Look on the web and you go, oh my God. Maybe it's in
Well, we're moving along pretty good today.
Yeah, I think that Pelosi runs a good meeting.
Okay, district court briefing, 30 minutes. Mr. Roscoe.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah, go back.
Thanks, Bill. Good evening. District Court. So a couple of things wanted to go over with you guys, give you a brief update as to how things are progressing with District Court now that we've switched over. I think this is about our fourth year, yeah, in 2012 we initiated it. Case filings for last year, we were at 12,500. This year, we're trending right around 13,700, so we're up about 10%.
So go over those numbers again, please.
Last year, our case filings were right around 12,571. This year, we are trending right around 13,700. So we're up about 10%, 9.6% from year to date.
Has that been the previous pattern over the other 3 years?
Actually, it's been a little up and down. In 2014, we were at 13,600. Now, in 2015, we dropped down to 12,400. I think with the addition of some new law enforcement, we can expect to see the numbers gradually increase as I get staff hired, which we're working on. It's a difficult time, though, right now to hire.
Is there any kind of a national formula out there as to how many prosecutors you should have in relationship to the number of police officers?
There isn't any national, because every state divides that stuff up differently. In California, for instance, most all the prosecution is done by the counties. In Washington, a lot of it is done by the cities. So there's no easy comparable. But the other thing that might also make it harder to even have standards within a state is because every city might have different codes, every city might have different priorities or philosophical focuses.
As far as the system, it seems to be working as planned. We have full district court services down here now, which expanded so they have access to small claims court, which we didn't have in the past. One of the things that district court is looking at doing is adding a community court for services. I recently went over to Spokane, saw how their community court was working. And community court is designed to transfer some of those quality of life offenses out of the criminal court and into more of a non-criminal, connect the individual participants with social services, i.e. the idea is to get them the alcohol, rehab, mental health services that they may need to hopefully improve their quality of life, as well as staying out of the criminal court, kind of decriminalizing those trespass offenses. The nice thing, one of the things I was really impressed with Spokane, how they set up their district or community court is they have their court in one room and all the service providers right next door. And the service providers aren't there just for the people going to the court, but they're for the general public as well. So hopefully they can get the services they need before they even get into the criminal system. Exactly. It's a really good idea. It's kind of the one-stop shop approach there for those type of services.
You know, we looked at that with Judge Tucker about 2 years ago and weren't able to get funding. How often does this community court meet and where are we getting the funding?
It would meet once or twice a week depending upon the need. And the officers would cite directly to the community court, and it would be a service that King County is looking at expanding. So it's nothing that the city would operate independent. It would be part of the services that we could contract with King County for if we're interested in expanding that role. They haven't established it yet, so it's still in the exploratory stage. That's why when we went over to Spokane, we went over there with King County. And King County is taking all the contract cities that are interested in that over to Spokane to kind of mirror and see how those services are established and kind of the good, bad, and the ugly with it. And for the most part, I will say, it was very positive from the city of Spokane. They raved about their program.
How often does the small claims court portion meet in a month?
Oh, a month, Dan, do you know?
They have,
Depends on the calendar.
they have a calendar, depending upon how many people might file lawsuits. The small claims are the very, very lower end dollar figures. In district court, you can only sue for dollars. You can't ask for like return of property or anything like that. So these are the ones that, for two reasons. Number one, it's lower dollar amount because that's what they set, but it's also where attorneys are not permitted to represent clients. So it's supposed to go fast. It's supposed to be for the dollar amounts that are lower. And it depends on how many people file lawsuits.
For example, I've had to argue for the city to recover when we've had individuals damage some of our city property. So I had to.
They won't let attorneys, even city employed attorneys, represent the city.
Well, it's nice to have that service because it does even the playing field. And also, some of the smallest issues can end up becoming some of the biggest issues in neighborhoods.
Yes.
And so it's nice to have this full menu of services or adjudication available.
Agreed. Any other questions or concerns as far as the operations go? Obviously, we have space issues. They want more of it, and we want to give them less of it. So that's it.
Space, like
As
in
far
the
as
Justice Center?
down at the Justice Center, they are expanding or wanting to expand, and we want them to contract, so we have more of the space available for police and prosecution down there. So we have some limitations there that we are definitely identified and working on.
How about jury trials? How much time are we allotted for jury trials each month?
We are allotted 1 week
Oh, 5
each
days.
month, up to 5 days, but I mean, they're not, it's not gonna happen that. What they'll do is they'll identify 1 week each month as the jury trial week. That sounds good. It has some downsides though, because you may have the capacity to bring 20 cases to court, except you don't have the courtrooms for them. So it makes it, even on cases where you've really done everything you can to bring it to trial, there's some challenges to get it to court. So a jury week doesn't necessarily always produce the number of cases you'd like to see going to jury.
What's the length, if there is such a thing as an average jury case?
In the district and municipal court arena, a lot of cases can be tried in 1 day.
Okay.
There are occasions where you see one going into 2 days, and much less frequently 3 or more days. But typically, these are the smaller criminal offenses that can be done within a relatively short period of time compared to the felonies.
Is there any provisions for us that if we had a so-called big month and we knew that we had to do something here that was going to maybe take 3 days to access court space in Kent?
You can always enter into agreements for that purpose. Maybe what would be more likely to be a venue that we could use would be the the RJC,
Oh, yeah,
rather
that's
than
what I
Kent's
meant.
court.
Yeah, okay,
King County's District Court.
yeah. Okay. Is the 5 days a week enough?
Our problem hasn't been having cases that are, we have cases we'd like to take to trial. The challenge we have is sometimes getting to be able to take those cases to court. And I don't want to say this in the wrong way, but sometimes all a defendant has to do to throw a monkey wrench into the works is to not show up or show up late, which then prevents us from being able to go forward. So there are some challenges. We're working on some of those challenges and don't have always good answers because there are so many variables. But that's our goal. We take stuff to trial, and we make sure that we are taking stuff to trial. We'd like to take more to trial a lot of times, but you can only do what you can do.
What do
You
you
don't always
foresee?
have defendants that cooperate.
Yeah. What do you foresee in the future as a timeline when we're going to have to look at the capacity again and maybe make some adjustments?
In terms of...
Oh, room, prosecuting
We
attorneys.
could use more room right now.
Yeah.
We could, we only have 2 courtrooms.
Yeah.
And if you look at what those courtrooms are expected to handle, there are already limitations on that. If we had 3 courtrooms, or the city of Kent has 4 courtrooms, I think Federal Way has 4 courtrooms, they have a little more flexibility than we do.
So it's more of an issue of courtrooms than it is prosecutors.
Yeah.
It's everything, who knows what the thing is that's going to be delaying something one time or another, but there are several different issues that go into the equations.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
I think Bill's
Oh, I'm
right.
sorry.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Councilmember Pelosa.
Actually, it was Councilor Wagner. I was looking, and then we'll catch you. Go ahead,
This
Rich.
is yours, isn't it? I'm sorry.
When somebody doesn't show up and you're all ready to go, do you have another case you can take right away, or does everybody get ready to go home?
It depends what the court rules, and sometimes the court says, well, we're gonna go with this case, assuming that the defendant will show up within the next hour or 2. So we don't always get to say the order. Sometimes it's a matter of what the court ends up doing or looking at in terms of what they think is going to go. It may be that the defendant, in one case, doesn't show up, but the witnesses in another case might not show up. So it all depends on always trying to fill the courtroom with what we think will be the most likely or successful trial to go.
Do you think, I don't know whether any other courts do this, that it would be useful to offer free taxi rides to get those folks to trial, since we got all our expenses of doing it and then they don't show, maybe because of transportation?
Well, you mean in terms of our witnesses? We have provided witness transportation on occasions. The city is in a tough position to communicate with a defendant who has an attorney. So if the defendant is represented, we have to go through the attorney. That's the way it is. I mean, that's I'm not complaining about it. It's just that's what we have to do.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Thank you. So Dan, in relation to the capacity issue, we don't have 3 courtrooms, and probably in the near, maybe long-term future, probably will not. So is the overflow going to be the Regional Justice Center? And if so, is there a timing issue of bringing cases forward to that court?
Well, there is, the answer to the question is there a timing issue? Yes, because we have speedy trial issues that always have to be accommodated. Most of the time, and I don't want to say this in a way that they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, but most of the time, a defendant can waive his or her right to a speedy trial, and that can delay it, and the court can accommodate that if there's a reason that the court thinks is justifiable. I don't want to propose this as a constant, but if we had an additional judge, we only have 2 allotted at a time. I've known cities that have used their council chambers as an overflow. That has some downsides too, though, because you've got to also have room for a jury to deliberate. You've got to have room for people to accommodate jury selection. So there's not always a perfect answer, and if we had maybe a little bit better luck in terms of when things get set and getting them to go, 2 courtrooms might work, but that's not always going to work.
John, Councilmember Holman.
I like John. The city of Auburn's growing. We're gonna top 80,000 next year, 100,000 by the end of the decade. Our police department's growing. Our need for more court space is growing. I think as a deliberative body, we should start looking at planning a new police station or new court, or separate the two. Not tomorrow, not next year, but begin the planning process and thinking, the deliberative process. We're busting at the seams, so best we start planning today for a need that's obviously going to occur within, hopefully, our lifetimes.
Okay.
Just a comment.
Yeah, thank you, John. Dan, we've talked about this years ago, Veterans Court. Any comments?
Well, the King County actually has some veteran court type programs. They also have some mental health court programs and some drug programs. Do they all fit, or do they all, one of the downsides is if they hold this type of a program in Seattle, it may limit some people's ability to utilize it because they may not be able to get to Seattle when, or, at such times as the court program is going on. But yes, there are some of those programs. And we have tried to participate in them to some, varying degrees of success in the county's district courts programs.
So what about our court here?
We don't have one specific to us, but there is a veterans court that could be perhaps utilized.
How do we get something going here?
Well, you know what I'm going to suggest? What might be valuable for us to do is to see if that would be a sufficiently utilized program. A lot of times, veterans are very good citizens, and they don't commit crimes, but there are some times when that would be something that could be a need.
But could,
I mean, we always tout the fact that we're veterans-friendly city, and we push the region, push the envelope regarding veterans. So how can we review that?
I'll tell you what, why don't I try to see if we can put together some information on what is out there at least in King County or other jurisdictions, and let's see what we can do.
Municipal Services has another meeting in August, so.
Pardon?
In August.
What?
This
Another meeting in August.
Service.
Okay,
Yeah,
we'll
we can
we'll
come
make
back.
sure we,
Shoot for that.
we'll make
put
sure
on
that
the
we have
agenda.
something by then.
Okay.
Yes.
along that same line, if we were to implement the community court, couldn't the veterans attend the community court one?
You can make it as broad as the need.
So when
And-
you're surveying out there to find out who's doing what, find out who's having community courts too. And we'll see which cities have both, which have one, that will
One
give
of
us
the-
some information.
One of the things we might also want to look at, and I'm not going to try to say this in any way to presuppose any outcome in our investigation, but Seattle had a community court and opted to move away from that because they felt it was not adequately meeting their needs. So there's some pluses and some minuses that we want to make sure we can at least address as well as we can.
There's a city in the north end that uses high school court for juveniles. I wouldn't say juveniles, but
Students.
for high school students.
I think we have a program like that.
Yeah.
We do here?
Yeah.
Student court.
And where is it performed?
Well, in the schools.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's cool. Well, this particular one was in a court.
Well, the only thing I'd say is if you utilize court facilities and they're
Yeah,
already
no, yeah,
short.
I appreciate that. Can we have some type of information regarding this student court that's run in the high school?
We will,
To-
let's target that as well in terms of information.
All
We
right.
also have it at our universities. We have student courts too for dealing with student discipline. I know the U does. I know Seattle U does too.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. And the other thing I have is city budget. Can you explain how we support the court via our budget?
Sure. We are billed by district court in arrears. So right now, we are reviewing 2016's billings. So they send us, based upon our case weighting, and they have a formula, and they allocate costs amongst all the contracted cities for the operations of the district court. So we get billed based upon our cases. Like for 2014, it was 1.4 million, 2015, 1.5.
We're going fast.
Okay.
214 was how much?
$1,458,000.
Okay.
In 2015, it was $1,518,402. Now, that is offset a bit by revenue that is collected as well for tickets, fines. So in 2014, we collected $843,921 in revenue. And in 2015, we collected $829,453. I had that written down.
Okay. Great. Guys and gals, anything else on this subject?
Can I throw another thought out, just
Yeah.
because it's part of the landscape that we need to work with? A couple years ago, here in Washington, the federal court ruled that there are case limitations that apply to public defenders, so that a public defender has a limitation on the number of cases he or she can take throughout the whole year. And that makes it more challenging for us to make sure that we can get public defenders available. There's a limitation on what they can do, but there's also a monetary consequence to that. It doesn't apply to prosecutors or police, but it does apply to the public defenders, and that's also something that we need to make sure we're able to
I have
address.
that separately in the budget. We have a contract for those public defense services, and we're meeting, actually, we have a meeting Thursday to go over their case weighting and make sure that they're in compliance with the public defenders.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Just follow up on that, Rob. So in the contract, we gave them a provision in there that would allow them to have a certain period of time. But we gave them, I guess you might say, a little bit of wiggle room in that as well.
We gave them a number of cases any public defenders allowed to hear during any calendar year. They're not to exceed X, to make sure that they're able to provide those indigent defendants adequate defense, as well as making sure that they have a system to provide investigatory services. So that's where we as a city have contracted with the public defense firm for that, and we also have conflict public defenders as well, because a lot of times their office could be conflicted from hearing another case because they either represented a witness or some other member of their family or what have you, so they have to conflict out those cases. So we have about 4 different conflict public defenders on contract as well.
John.
We are a client of the district court.
Yes.
Without invading into the judicial discretion, without being, there have been some concern about multiple continuances and the cost, both in overtime of the officer, the need to prepare for cases multiple times. How much influence do we have, or where would we have to draw the line in asking for assistance to be a little more aware that multiple continuances?
We've actually had a number of meetings. Rob and the mayor and I have met a number of times with representatives of the district court, trying to see how we can be more effective and more efficient in addressing some of these things. When you have cases that are set over again and again and again, and sometimes these delays amount to years, where you aren't be able to close a case or bring it to trial, it can be a real problem. And we have raised these issues to the district court. They are aware of it. I don't know that we have all the answers that would give us satisfactory solutions, but we are raising these issues.
Well, I think Councilmember Holman, you hit the nail on the head when you said it. There's a fine line. We can't tell a judge how to run their courtroom. And there's no
Top of the
guarantee,
pyramid.
even if we had our own city judge, you could have the same problems associated with that because they are their own independent judicial branch.
I'm being discreet in my question.
Correct. So we do have some limitations there, but we have expressed our concerns over that and making sure that they are at least heard.
Deputy Mayor.
I want to echo what John's saying, because I've heard it from the so-called victims who want resolutions in these situations, and they're sometimes very hairy, and they want it over with. And I've also heard it from the attorneys, that it's hard to keep this herd of cats together. And in addition to delaying justice, it runs the costs up considerably for some who really can't bear that cost. So I'm glad you're aware of this. And I guess that's the reason for my first question, how much jury time do we get? Because if you have on Friday and you got to wait 3 more weeks, you're more likely to lose people, but some of these people really want to be lost.
I will tell you this, we had one case that we ended up fighting to get this case to go to trial after it had been continued and continued and continued for over a year. One of our witnesses actually passed away, unrelated to the trial process, but it makes it very, very difficult. And we ultimately had to put that case in front of other cases to make sure we had that go forward with what we felt was maybe not always the best circumstances that led up to that. But I think what you're hearing is the same thing that
You're saying.
we're all saying, yes.
Okay, anything else? This has been a great discussion, and we look forward to another discussion in August.
You bet. We'll have that ready
Great.
for you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we have the Auburn Airport briefing. Ingrid Gobb is going to introduce John Tyson, who's the chair of the Airport Advisory Board, and then Jamel Garcia, who's the Aviation Management Group, who keeps the airport running, buzzing,
Flying.
flying. Welcome, you guys and gal.
Thank you.
So, as Councilmember Pelosi said, we're here to give you just a briefing on kind of what we've been doing at the airport and with the Airport Advisory Board. Many of you saw previously the strategic plan that was put together with the board and approved off on that. And so this is basically a follow-up to that of kind of what's been going on and where we're at. So the first thing I wanted to start off with was just kind of some of the statistics, general information about the airport. So 2016, the annual operations at the airport, we were actually up to about $142,000 a year in 2016, which is quite a bit of an increase over the past year. So
When you say operations, can you explain?
Airplanes.
Yeah, sure. Operations, as defined by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, is takeoffs and landings.
Thank you.
And so one of the other questions that was asked is kind of what's the status of the hangars and the tie-down area. So giving you kind of a status on the open hangars and closed hangars, we're pretty much full on those, and that's pretty much consistently staying full as we have tenants who leave. We have a waiting list of now 13 folks on there that we basically offer those spaces to. Tie-downs were actually quite high as well compared to past years. So we have 89 tie-down locations, of which we've got 51 of those occupied right now. Typically, those are usually rented out at about, I think, the 30% level. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And we're more than half full on those. So those are all good signs for the airport. And I know there was lots of discussion when we went through the contract with AMG about grounds maintenance and all of that stuff, and I just wanted to let you know that as we've gone through the contract process with Jamel, all of that level of service has remained the same as what it was in previous years, so that's not changing in any way, shape, or form.
So previous years, we've not had service at the airport on Saturdays and Sundays, the staff there. Okay. Do we have any data to show how many of the takeoff and landings take place each day of the week, and then what happens on Saturday and Sunday? Because I would hazard to guess that there are some recreational pilots and people that don't have the latitude to fly on the weekdays, and they choose to be there on the weekend. So I'd like to see something, because maybe we should have staff there on Saturdays and Sunday, or a skeleton crew or something.
So
What do you, airport, I was going to say junkies, but experts, but how do you feel about having staff there, even a skeleton staff, on Saturdays and Sundays?
So I'll give you my 2 cents and then
Yes,
and
thank
you
you.
can weigh in as well. So it's not a towered airport, so for takeoffs and landings, those can happen whether there's staff there or not. The fuel right now for the avgas that's there is self-serve, so I mean they can go in there as long as they've got a credit card, they can pay for that. So really what you're missing with staff not being there, and Jamel can talk to this some more, is basically being able to go into the airport office and potentially hang out at the pilot's lounge and a few things like that. But otherwise, the airport is open and functioning for those that are tenants. So if you've got other things you want to add?
Yeah, the first 10 years of the 15 years we've been contractors at the airport in the city, we were open 6 days a week. In 2013, there was a change to go to 5 days a week. We looked at the operation staying open on Saturday and just being closed on Sunday, surveying the amount of phone calls that came in, the amount of walk-ins for, asking about rates or wanting to rent a hangar was minimal. There's not a lot of maintenance that could be done because we wanted to staff the office, so if Mike were to go out, which was a staff covering Saturdays, the office would be unavailable during the time that maybe he would be out mowing or something like that. So the consensus during 2013 was either to go to 7 days a week or to pull it back to 5 days a week. A survey was done of other airport, specifically airport management, not what we consider fixed-based operation or an FBO that provides itinerant services. Most of that is fuel. Sometimes there's limited maintenance that could be available for itinerant people or based aircraft. That's services that the airport management wouldn't offer anyway, other than fueling on a self-serve basis. So that's why there was the decision made to go to 5 days a week, is because most airport management, if we speak specifically on airport management, Renton, Crest, Pierce County, there's usually not anybody there. There could be maintenance people, but not specifically anything customer service related.
Okay, I'll tell my husband that when he can't get the key card to work.
Okay.
Her husband flies out there. And of course, John, are you still flying, or you still flying out there?
Still a tenant.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm in arrears, I confess.
Are you
Oh,
really?
Really?
Uh-oh.
Oh.
You guys hear that? Jamel?
We've
Nailing.
chatted.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So the airport strategic business plan, which was approved earlier this year, had quite a few items for beginning work in 2017. The board really kind of focused in on a couple areas right now, and this is really kind of the narrowing down of all the different items to kind of the top few. Jet A fuel, how we're going to do the development and the implementation for that temporary pilot program. The long-term rate study and the competitive market assessment for the airport and the area surrounding.
Cover Jet A a little more?
Going to in the next slide.
Oh, okay, perfect.
So current development sites, marketing, and airport growth areas. One of the other things, as was mentioned during the budget amendment number 2 discussion, that we're really focused on is the facility assessment. So getting that budget into this year so we can begin that process, as we're seeing more and more little issues crop up at the airport. One of the other projects on there was some gate repairs, so we want to get a handle on what is the real need at the airport, because I think that's going to have some long-term impact on the airport budget, as well as feed into that potential long-term rate study for the airport for what we ultimately want to do at the airport.
Councilmember Wagner.
Long-term rate study, when Councilmember Poe was here, he thought we should build more hangars. And he thought we could make them a paying operation, that it wouldn't really cost us anything, even the interest on the money we loan the airport. Have we ever, as the Airport Advisory Board or anybody, actually looked at that possibility of hangars paying for themselves?
I don't know that we've looked at that in the last several years specifically, but as part of the competitive market assessment, we're also looking at what are the items to focus on for development at the airport? Is it hangars? Is it other businesses? What should we be bringing in? And what is the value of that? So what's the rates that we could actually charge for hangars? All of that is part of that whole market assessment and rate study. So it's quite an undertaking for that one.
But the key in my comment is that Fred said you could make it pay for itself, where that hasn't been the thought for all years. We kind of maybe wanted to recover our money if we could, but we were willing to subsidize some. He said, make it pay for itself, make money at it.
There was in 2009, the project that built Hangar Rows 9, what we call Hangar Rows 9 and 10, the closed hangars up at the north end. Those have paid for themselves over time, both the principal and the interest. They come, that was a bond, was it general obligation bond, Shelley?
It was a general obligation bond, and it'll be paid off in 2019. Things to consider when we're talking about potentially issuing debt to build hangars is we have to find a land to do it. We even looked at swapping out the existing rows 3 through 7, but then you'd lose the revenue that you are currently receiving from those hangars, and the delta between that revenue and the increased revenue wouldn't cover the debt service. And then also, if you find another spot to build, you have the opportunity cost on the land that could be leased for other development. So it's
There's two methods of thought. One is lease the land, have it privately developed, as long as it meets the criteria of the master plan and the direction that the city wants the airport to go in. The other is to have the airport, the city, own all the facilities. There's the risk of going in and making that development, paying for it, and then have the cash flow to back it up. I'm going to say in the industry, you're looking at probably a 60-40 split. 60% go with private developers because they can usually do it, I hate to say it, quicker and less money. Okay. Then others have either decided to do it that way and have funded it. Usually those are more port authorities that have taxing authority to be able to go in and do that type of thing versus municipalities. So unless the airport is a commercial use airport versus ours being a reliever airport, there's usually, it's very risky.
Ingrid, I had a question about the facility condition assessment. Does it take a special qualification or type of engineer to analyze or assess an airport, and do we have that capability?
So we do not have that capability in-house, so part of that, the funds for that is basically hiring a consultant to come in and do that for us and actually develop basically an assessment of the current conditions of each of the buildings out there and the facilities out there, what needs to be done, as well as what needs to be done on a long-term maintenance plan for those buildings, so that we can look at what's really needed in our airport budget to continue to maintain those buildings. Okay. So we're going to move on to Jet A fuel. So planning and implementation for Jet A fuel, there's kind of two different thoughts that are going on right now. We have our interim solution, so this is the short-term solution, and the airport board, and John and Jamel can jump in at any time on this, have been discussing the two kind of options that we have. So the two options that we have on the table is basically a private partnership between AMG and Cascade, who is the tenant on the airport that really would like to be able to have Jet A fuel on site, as well as evaluating if we were to do more of a public-private partnership where the city is involved in either helping to basically putting together that fuel, providing the fuel on site, working with AMG, basically operating the fuel system. At this point, the board is leaning more towards the first option, the private-public, or the private partnership option. And we have been working with AMG and Cascade on they've kind of got to get their deal put together of kind of how would they work through that. And then there would be an operating agreement that would happen between the airport and AMG and Cascade on how that fuel would be provided on site and all of the other legal requirements that go along with that, including liability, indemnification, all of those things. And I don't know if you guys want to mention anything about the board conversation on that.
Sure. The idea was, as we first started to be able to provide jet fuel service for the clientele that Cascade helicopters, they work strictly on turbine-powered helicopters. Something we have talked about previously at the airport and with council on is the next step for the airport, moving into just, for a better term, recreational to general aviation reciprocating engine utilization. Aviation is the first to suffer during a downturn in the economy, and it's the last to recover. That said, the turbine-powered aircraft are more business-oriented than pleasure. So the aircraft has a mission to perform. You know, the Nordstroms, the Microsofts, you know, a little bit higher end, but even some of the smaller businesses that run, you know, anywhere from a $4 to $5 million aircraft. Those guys use the aircraft as a tool. They will continue to use that as a tool even in a downturn. They will expand their territories to get more market share, that type of thing. The general aviation recreational flyer, money goes into their car, goes into their home, goes into something other than the fuel tank or their aircraft. So they will tend to either sell their airplane, let it sit, or reduce the utilization of the aircraft. So it's more of a leisure dollar that we're dealing with at the airport today. We need to move into more of the business dollar that will continue and take us through those downturns, and during better times give us the funds that we need to make the infrastructure improvements and growth opportunities.
And I would just say that you know, it's all part of the strategic plan to grow the services at the airport. You know, you've heard us talk about, you know, the occupancy rates in Renton and at Boeing Field and everything moving south, and you know, Ingrid just went over our own occupancy rates. So we know there's a growing demand for services out there, but we also know that you know, right now we've got limited services. So this is one of the areas that we can begin to grow, and we do that parallel to the long-term rate study and the market analysis. And we begin to discover what we have, and it really becomes a test market also. I mean, this is a temporary solution, right? And you know, if it goes the way we think it will, it could lead to a long-term commitment to Jet A.
I think also the runway enhancement plays into this as well, so that won't be completed until the end of 2018 for construction. So getting some of your larger planes to come into the site is probably not going to happen until the 2019 time period. So by doing an interim solution, hopefully before the end of this year, gives us a year's worth of how are we doing? Do we have interest in having Jet A fuel at the airport, and the ability to generate the desire for folks to come to the airport for that? So gives us a good test before we go into that financial discussion of how do we fund a long-term solution. And what I have up on the slides is just some of the comments of the discussion that's happened at the board level as to when would that make sense to go from that temporary setup to a more permanent solution, which is basically bringing an actual above-ground tank on site and putting in the infrastructure necessary to have that permanent fuel tank on site. So you can see basically once we've established 40,000 gallons annually as being purchased for Jet A fuel, so that you have the ability to get the larger fuel loads to come in, so that you're not short loading and you're not paying a premium price for the Jet A fuel. And then we're also anticipating that because of the cost of doing this and where the airport's finances are, that this is going to have some sort of financing strategy with it, whether that's a bond or a loan. It's going to have something that goes with that. So that's a discussion in the future with the council to make sure before we take that leap that we really are ready to do that.
Councilmember Wagner.
As we have that discussion, I'd like to talk about whether we could form a port and have some taxing authority.
I would concur with that research, desire for that research.
Okay. Okay, so the other thing that I had a little bit more detail on there is the rate study and the market assessment. We're actually going to put this out for one consultant to do both because it makes sense for them to do the full market analysis in there. We are currently looking at probably publishing that request for proposal in July, with the selection process happening between August, September, depending upon how many apply and the interview processes. And then I'm currently anticipating the study duration's about 9 to 12 months for them to complete that work, but we'll get more into that specifics when we get that final RFP out. So again, that's basically to look at what is the development capability at the site, what types of businesses should we be focusing on, what makes sense at the airport to develop in the future, as well as that long-term rate. So how much should we be charging for our hangars, how much should we be charging for tie downs, all of that, and compare that with also some of the other areas, other airports in the area and what they're doing.
As you know, I've been a proponent of creating some kind of incentive zone outside of the airport fences to attract various businesses to that area that would have an interest in being close to the airport. I didn't see any comment about that, and I think it's probably because the board is inside the fences, and that's what we're talking about today. But I'd like to see the board take a little bit of side trip into what could we do around the outside of the fences.
And the market assessment actually does include that, both in the airport as well as adjacent to the airport. So that is one of the things that the airport is focusing on, and the airport board is actually looking into. I don't know if you want to add any more on that.
I would just say that the board is probably equally interested in areas adjacent to the airport as they are existing airport property. And, you know, to the board, I think this is the most exciting part of the strategic plan, because you know the master plan really is more visionary. Right now, it's not what I would, at least a large part of it, is not actionable. So this gives the market study gives the city the market data they need to make some of the master plan pieces actionable. And we know we have something, but we don't know exactly what we have, right? So we're basing so far our strategies on you know, internal data and perception. So this gives us the external market data we need to make this stuff actionable. But we're excited that the city is just as interested as we are about some of those adjacent properties, because I think there's some opportunity there. Jamil.
No, I concur, and looking at somebody else doing it, I can handle most everything inside the fence with the 35 years of experience in owning my own flight school, maintenance shop, aircraft sales charter, and now 15 years of airport management. I'm kind of getting used to the inside the fence. The outside of the fence, I know what benefits the airport can bring to them, but I think the question needs to be asked is what do they need? What's their impression of what can the airport do for them? And that's where I kind of have to draw my line and say, how can I help?
That's where we need economic development.
And the only other thing I'd add is we do have 2 parcels inside the fence that still, are not developed. So we kind of kid, and it's the joke, we got to get to Portland before we look out of state, right? So we do have an inside the fence opportunity still.
I want to ask Councilmember Wagner. About 10 minutes ago, you said develop a port. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, lots of cities who aren't on a waterway create a port. And I'm thinking we ought to look and see how many of them did it just so they can have a taxing authority for their airport. Because, the port here is the airport as well as the maritime. So
Economic development.
I think it might be a useful thing to do, as long as we had a fair taxing system. I don't know that we want to tax everybody in town, or probably not. And so, taxing authority would come with a lot of caveats about what you might do with it. But it would be so much more flexible for us if we somehow had the ability to think about funding for improvements to the airport.
Doug has some information on that. He's done research over the years.
Thank you.
So the last thing that we came to talk about tonight was the tracking matrix that we actually use, that staff use with the board to communicate on kind of what's going on. And I've attached the one that we just went over with the board at last week's special meeting with them. So the way that this is set up is the first page is really just talking the general projects and kind of what's going on and what are we focused on. And then the remaining pages of that tracking matrix are really kind of the 2017 only action items for the strategic plan, where we go in and we update kind of the information each month. And John, if you want to explain kind of what the board uses
Sure.
for.
And to some extent, this matrix existed before with just current to-dos that the board and the city had for the airport. But as Ingrid said, we took the entire strategic plan that runs out, through 2019, 2020?
Yes.
And we put every item off that strategic plan onto this tracking matrix. Currently, we're really each meeting looking at the current year primarily, but it gives the board, AMG, and the city visibility on all the action items, and it's turned out to be a really great document for then the city, Ingrid and Kevin report back to the board on the things that they own, but it holds the board and AMG accountable also for the things that we own. So it kind of keeps everybody honest with regard to to-dos, but also staying on track with the due dates as well. It's a great tool.
How's the coyote doing out there?
He's doing pretty good.
Is he?
Yeah.
You
His
haven't
girlfriend's doing pretty good too.
Oh, he's got a girlfriend now. You haven't had
We
to
haven't
shoot
seen any
him.
pups.
Okay, thank you.
But he's been getting a little too friendly, so
Oh.
we have a call into US
Okay.
DA to see what they can help us with.
So, good discussion again. Keeps everybody aware of what is going on out there.
I'll just add 2 cents that as the board chair, I'm really excited about where the airport is right now. We got the contract done, thank you, City of Auburn, with AMG. So we've got a lot of confidence in the work they do managing the airport. We really, I'm in my 4th year on the board, and I think we've got the best board that we've had in those 4 years. We've got a really smart, talented, interested group of board members, and we're also excited about the support that Ingrid and Kevin provide to the board as well. So I think we've got a good thing going right there, and with the master plan and the strategic plan that we've developed, I expect a lot of great things, for the airport going forward.
Okay, thank you very much for your time this evening. And we learned a lot and we're up to date.
Great,
Oh.
thank you.
Maybe we can do this again in a month or so.
Love to.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to Roman numeral 5, other discussion items. Any other discussion items? Roman numeral 6, new business. Then let's look at our matrix. I think that Councilmember Pelosi asked that in August we have an update on, what was the topic again? Was that the district court?
Business, well, yeah, district court,
Okay.
yep. District court.
Other committees or special interest groups, any updates that you would like recorded on the document?
What, and Public Works and Community Development, looks like we're farther out for the next meeting than I thought we were going to be. What do you see for the next meeting for the red line?
There was apparently if you look at page 103 of 103, you can see that there was some flip-flopping done to accommodate probably some regional or national conferences. So you're scheduled for July 24th.
Where does it show that? Oh, there I see, yeah, after the, okay, that's good.
Okay?
I can see that.
Anything you would like to see changed, Councilmember Baggett?
No, looks like we're on schedule.
Wagner, are you okay with what's down for Public Works?
Yeah.
Okay, and Pelosi will do the modification of the August meeting to talk some more about the court issues.
Yeah, and then business shopping carts,
Yeah, where did-
item 6.
Yeah.
I forget, Randy's gone.
Maybe we can just move that to August?
Yeah,
Or do you want it on the next meeting?
I think it'd be, Ingrid, can we do it at the next meeting, shopping carts?
So if I remember correctly from the last
I'm
discussion.
trying to remember, but.
There was some research that we needed to do with some other agencies about what do they
Oh,
do. I
right.
don't know that
Who
we'll
would-
be ready for the next meeting. I think the August meeting would probably be more appropriate.
Okay, so we'll make that August 28th. then.
Okay.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Okay.
Business license.
And I think that Yolanda feels comfortable with what we have planned for the next meeting in July, study session. And with that, I will adjourn. Thank you. We're gonna go into an executive session at this time for about 15 minutes. 15 minutes. And then we will be
We
back and there'll be no business.
No formal business afterwards?
Yes, correct.
We also need to identify the subject matter and who would be going for
Okay, and it's regarding a complaint?
complaining against the public.
And,
official.
yes, we'll need the council members and Rob and the city attorney.
And the mayor requested that she be excused for this since it doesn't. affect
Good.
her.